In just 45 seconds, one voice exposed 3 years of lies. Live inside the U.S. Capitol. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't screamed. It was played from a laptop by a congresswoman who never raised her voice but left the entire chamber frozen. His name was Kash Patel, a former federal official who once moved through classified briefings with a smirk. Her name? Jasmine Crockett. And when she hit play, everything changed. It was a closed-door memo, a voice recording, a plan to bury the truth beneath encrypted apps and burner phones. But the moment his own words echoed through that hearing room, you could hear chairs shift, phones buzz, and history begin to turn. What made a man of power, trained, rehearsed, and protected, crack in front of millions? And what truth was he so desperate to keep buried? This story, while fictionalized, is rooted in realities far too familiar. Systems of silence, patterns of injustice, and voices long ignored. Names and events have been dramatized, but the emotion is real. The questions are real, and the consequences of not asking them are real. Because sometimes it only takes 45 seconds to hear what was hidden for years. It wasn't the kind of morning that warned anyone to brace for a political earthquake, but maybe that was the point. Washington, D.C. sat beneath a colorless sky, the kind that seemed poured from wet concrete. A slow, misting drizzle clung to the windows of government buildings and pooled in the cracks of Capitol Hill. Traffic moved like it knew something was off, not broken, just tense, as if the city itself was holding its breath. At exactly 7:43 a.m., a black government-issued sedan eased to a stop outside the Rayburn House office building. The door opened, and Representative Jasmine Crockett stepped out alone. No entourage, no press, no umbrella. Even though the sky had clearly made up its mind. She wore a charcoal gray coat over a deep navy suit, her heels clicking with controlled precision on the wet pavement. Her pace didn't slow as she climbed the marble steps, even when a sharp gust of wind tugged at the edges of her coat. She didn't flinch. Inside, the security staff nodded in recognition, but said nothing. They knew her by now. Jasmine was never early, never late. Always just in time to be underestimated. What no one else knew, not the reporters circling the rotunda, not even most of the committee staff, was that Jasmine Crockett had something in her bag that could upend the next 72 hours of news. A document, unverified, unannounced, but real, and more dangerous than anyone yet realized. Room 2141 had been set aside for the hearing. A routine intelligence oversight review, the notice said. No special sessions, no witness protections. Just a name, Kash Patel, a former federal official with a long resume, a sharp tongue, and enough political armor to believe he couldn't bleed. Jasmine had read the agenda the night before. On paper, it was nothing. A few follow-ups on old testimonies, clarifications on timelines, definitions of internal communications. But somewhere around 11:30 p.m., her staffer Brenda had walked into her office holding a slim, unmarked folder. "We found something," she said. No smile, no flourish, just 5 words. Jasmine didn't ask where it came from. Not yet. She read it once, then again, and then she just whispered, "We wait." Now as she moved through the quiet hallway, passing aides with coffee and interns with clipboards, Jasmine kept one hand lightly on the strap of her bag. The folder was inside. No copies, no scans. Not yet. She didn't trust digital anymore. Not with what was in there. A few steps ahead, she spotted one of Patel's aides. Young, overly confident, too new to know better. He glanced at her, then quickly looked away. He didn't know she had it. No one did. At 7:59 a.m., Jasmine stepped into room 2141. The overhead lights were already buzzing faintly, as if they sensed something coming. Staffers shuffled papers. A low murmur rippled among the seats. C-SPAN's camera crew adjusted tripods, half bored, half curious. Patel's nameplate gleamed under LED lights on the witness table. His seat was still empty, and for a moment, everything was still. Then Jasmine walked to her seat, placed her bag carefully beside her chair, and opened her legal pad. The folder remained untouched. For now. The door on the other side of the room clicked open exactly 2 minutes later. Kash Patel entered like a man stepping onto a familiar stage, confident, relaxed, the kind of self-assured that came not from innocence, but insulation. His tailored navy suit broke the dull palette of the room, and his tie, a shade of crimson that bordered on theatrical, seemed to say he knew the cameras were already rolling. One hand in his pocket, the other adjusting the mic on his lapel, he grinned at one of the press photographers as if the day was his to narrate. He made small talk with his attorney, a man in a pale gray suit with the blank stare of someone paid to show no emotion. Patel said something under his breath. A joke, maybe. And the attorney smirked, just enough to confirm it wasn't about law. Jasmine didn't look up. She didn't need to. Her pen moved slowly across the page in front of her, not taking notes, but drawing a line beneath a sentence she had underlined 3 times the night before. Behind her, Brenda leaned in just slightly and whispered, "He thinks this is a game." Jasmine gave no response. She already knew. She had watched men like Patel before, not just in Congress, in courtrooms, in boardrooms, in emergency hearings where truth came late and accountability came never. The smile was always the same, the curated confidence, the lean-back posture, the verbal jabs veiled in charm. But it was always just a performance, a mask designed to hide the fear of what would happen if someone actually read the footnotes. That was the thing about the memo. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't scream. It didn't come on letterhead. It was plain white paper with cold black ink, no highlights, no redactions. But it told a story, in the way only a document written by someone who believed they'd never be caught could. Jasmine had read enough deposition transcripts to know the difference between a man who lied and a man who never thought the truth would matter. The memo didn't come through official channels. It had no chain of custody. It hadn't been mentioned in any prior subpoenas or discovery reviews. It arrived quietly, tucked inside a plain envelope, left at a district office by a woman who refused to give her name. Brenda was the one who found it, flagged it, verified the metadata. 3 email addresses, 1 sender, 1 recipient, and 1 carbon copy that didn't make sense until it did. By 1 a.m. that night, Jasmine and her team were cross-referencing every element, phone logs, email headers, scheduling overlaps. It wasn't enough to have something damning. They needed to be sure it couldn't be denied. Not easily, not loudly. And so, the folder stayed zipped in Jasmine's bag. Not because she was unsure, but because timing was everything. Patel finally sat down at the witness table, smoothed his tie, and looked directly at the chairman. Then for just a second, his gaze drifted, straight to Jasmine. He smiled. She didn't. Instead, she turned the page in her notebook, and beneath that page, beneath even the words she'd prepared, was the copy of the memo Patel had forgotten existed. Not for long. The chairman's gavel struck once, not loud but sharp enough to hush the last of the whispers. Room 2141 settled into an anticipatory quiet, the kind of silence that stretches just a little too long before something irreversible happens. Chairman Dupont, a man known for his measured tone and disinterest in theatrics, welcomed everyone with the routine preamble. "Today's session," he began, "concerns clarifications regarding prior testimony related to internal communications surrounding the March 14th intelligence briefing." A few people nodded. Most barely reacted. Even the CSPAN camera crew looked half asleep. Patel appeared comfortable, too comfortable. His arms rested loosely on the table, fingertips tapping a silent rhythm, as if waiting to be asked questions he'd already memorized the answers to. He knew the drill. Respond narrowly, stay calm, and avoid giving more than was asked. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to play the drill. She wasn't prepped for defense. She was positioned for exposure. The first 20 minutes passed predictably. Patel's responses were crisp, lawyered to the bone. Dates, names, selective forgetfulness. "To the best of my recollection," became his mantra. Jasmine listened, occasionally jotting something down, never raising her eyes. She waited until the chairman gave her the nod. When he did, she didn't adjust her mic. She didn't clear her throat. She simply spoke, clear even, and without pause. Mr. Patel, she began, in your last appearance before this committee, you testified that you had no written communication with Mr. Devlin regarding the March 14th briefing. Is that correct? Patel glanced sideways, slightly caught off guard by her directness, then quickly recovered. That's correct, he said, offering a nod. I believe that's what I stated. Jasmine didn't respond. Not at first. Instead, she lowered her eyes again and flipped a discreet tab in her folder. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, like someone carefully disarming a mechanism. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. No highlighter, no sticky note, no dramatic reveal. Just ink on white. She laid it flat before her and raised it into view. I am entering into the record a memo dated March 13th, she said. It is addressed from your personal email to Mr. Devlin's private account. It references verbatim details from the March 14th briefing. The document is time-stamped, signed, and carbon copied to 2 additional staffers. There was a shift. Not loud, not immediate, but noticeable. A chair creaked. A pen stopped mid-scribble. Patel blinked once, then twice. That email must be misattributed, he said, voice still calm, but without the rhythm he'd had before. I don't believe I wrote that. You signed it, Jasmine replied, not looking up. Your signature matches 3 other memos archived from the same account, same font, same metadata. Behind her, Brenda watched Patel's attorney lean in, his hand drifting to his client's wrist under the table. A silent cue. Jasmine placed the memo down gently. Then finally she looked up. I'll move to my next question, she said, but for the record, this is just one of several discrepancies we've identified. Before she could continue, Patel lifted his hand slightly. His voice was firmer now, not angry but defensive. With all due respect, Representative, he began, this document doesn't reflect what actually happened. There's context you're missing. Jasmine didn't blink. Then perhaps, she said, turning the page, you can provide that context now. And just like that, the game was no longer his. For a moment, no one moved. The paper Jasmine placed on the table didn't flare like a grenade. It settled like a stone, heavy, irrefutable. Patel adjusted the cuff of his shirt, his jaw tightening just enough for anyone really watching to notice. He leaned slightly toward the microphone, the faux casual air thinning. Again, he said, slower this time, I don't recall authoring that memo. It's possible someone on my team drafted a version. He hesitated. Without my knowledge. Jasmine tilted her head, not in disbelief, but as if mentally checking off a box labeled Deflection, Phase 1. Her voice was as level as ever. Mr. Patel, you stated under oath that you had no written communication regarding that briefing. None. Do you understand what's at stake when a statement like that contradicts a time-stamped document entered into the congressional record? The words under oath didn't echo in the room, but they landed. Chairman DuPont looked up from his notes. A few aides behind the committee table shifted in their seats, alert now. This wasn't a disagreement about policy. It was about truth and whether it had been manipulated. Patel nodded once, slower than before. I understand, he said, then added quickly, but this feels like an ambush. These materials weren't part of the original discovery. That's because, Jasmine said, sliding another page forward, they weren't discovered. They were buried. Silence, and then she continued. This second document, she said, is a text exchange between you and Mr. Devlin the day after the memo was sent. You refer to it explicitly. Your word, that memo's locked, clean, and off the radar. She paused just long enough for the weight to settle. Is that still something you don't recall? Patel glanced at his attorney, who remained still. No objections, no gestures. The silence between them was louder than denial. He leaned forward again, pressing both palms flat against the table. Private text messages don't carry the same intent as official documentation, he said. They were offhand comments between colleagues. They referenced a federal intelligence briefing, Jasmine replied, not a lunch order. This time the reaction wasn't a whisper. It was a collective shift. Reporters sitting behind velvet ropes stopped typing. A CSPAN producer in the hallway, watching from a feed, mouthed something silent, then hit the record button again. Chairman DuPont cleared his throat. Mr. Patel, he said, voice firmer now. You may clarify your position or invoke your Fifth Amendment rights. I will remind you, perjury before this committee is not taken lightly. The word perjury carried a finality that not even Patel could laugh off. His lips parted as if to argue, then closed again. A second later, he whispered something to his lawyer, who didn't respond, just looked straight ahead. Jasmine waited, and in that waiting, something shifted, not in volume, but in control. Because from that moment on, Patel wasn't answering questions. He was defending a version of reality that was crumbling by the second. The document Jasmine slid forward didn't scream. It whispered, with the kind of whisper that made the whole room lean in. It wasn't printed on glossy paper or marked with bold headers. It was a screenshot, one clean image from a phone screen, slightly pixelated at the edges, but devastatingly clear where it mattered. The date, the sender, the words. "This is a captured message," Jasmine said calmly, "taken from an encrypted app used between you and Mr. Devlin. It's dated March 14th, 7:21 p.m., less than 24 hours after the email you say you didn't write. The text reads, that memo's locked, clean, and off the radar, just like we said." Patel didn't speak right away. His eyes darted, once to the screen behind her, then quickly to his lawyer. The attorney gave no signal. Nothing to grab onto, nothing to twist. So Patel laughed, not from confidence, but from discomfort. "You're seriously bringing screenshots into a federal hearing?" Jasmine's expression didn't change. "Do you dispute the content?" "Number, I'm saying, you're trying to make a political spectacle out of informal conversations. That wasn't an official channel." "It referenced an official intelligence briefing," she answered evenly, "and came from your verified device, which you used to access classified committee servers. So unless the lunch you were ordering involved burner phones and chain of custody protocols, we'll stay focused." A low gasp fluttered through the gallery. Not dramatic, not disruptive, just the sound of people realizing the temperature in the room had quietly dropped. Even the committee members, some of whom had spent the last hour half scrolling through emails, were suddenly locked in. Chairman Dupont leaned back in his chair. He adjusted his glasses slowly, as if trying to catch up to what the public was already watching unfold in real time. Patel shifted again. This time his posture changed. His back, once straight and unbothered, slouched just enough to betray tension. One hand scratched the back of his neck. Slow, habitual, a sign that even his body had stopped pretending this was normal. "The message was never intended to mislead," he said tightly, "and it certainly didn't go anywhere. You're taking things out of context." "Then give us the context," Jasmine replied, "because so far, all we have is a paper trail that directly contradicts your sworn testimony." Patel opened his mouth, then closed it. The room was too still. Too many eyes, too many cameras. His lawyer reached beneath the table and placed a firm hand on his arm. Just a touch, a silent signal. Enough. Behind Jasmine, Brenda handed her another document. This one printed in color. Jasmine didn't lift it dramatically. She simply raised it high enough for the room to see, then lowered it to her notes. "This is the metadata report," she said. "It confirms that the phone used to send that message is registered to your name, your number, and was logged into the committee's secure portal on March 13th, 14th, and 15th. It also confirms that the file transfer from your account to Mr. Devlin's occurred at 11:08 p.m., directly contradicting your statement that no such communication existed." Patel said nothing. "Do you still maintain," Jasmine asked, voice steady, "that you had no knowledge of this memo's existence?" His lips tightened. "I don't recall signing it." "Good thing," she said, pausing just enough. "We don't rely on memory alone." And for the first time since the hearing began, the man once known for controlling every narrative had nothing left to say. Patel's silence wasn't the measured kind that buys time. It was the kind that happens when you run out of lies you think people will still believe. His lawyer shifted in his seat but didn't speak. Brenda glanced at Jasmine, offering a slight nod, her expression unreadable. The message had landed. The proof was there, and the room knew it. Somewhere near the back, an intern whispered under their breath, "She's cooking him." It wasn't loud enough to interrupt, but just audible enough to capture the moment. Even those who came expecting a routine oversight session were now fully alert, their attention glued to the woman at the end of the table, who hadn't raised her voice once. Jasmine placed the metadata report down gently, almost tenderly, like it was a photograph of someone long lost and finally found. Then she looked up, locking eyes with Patel for the first time. "I'll move to my next question," she said, her tone not confrontational but crisp, almost polite. "But for clarity's sake, this is not the only inconsistency we've identified. In fact," but she never finished the sentence. Patel raised his hand, not high, just enough to interrupt. It hovered there for a second, uncertain whether to command attention or plead for it. His voice came out firmer than before, touched with a thin veneer of irritation. "With all due respect, Representative, that email doesn't reflect what actually happened. There's context you're not including. You're making this look worse than it is." Jasmine didn't blink. "Then perhaps," she said calmly, "you can provide that context now." Patel glanced around, suddenly aware of just how many people were watching. The cameras, the committee, his own legal counsel, his hands folded in front of him, but not without effort. His posture had changed. He was leaning forward now, no longer the relaxed witness, but a man trying to slow a leak before it became a flood. "If someone on my team sent that draft, and it was misattributed to me—" "You signed it," Jasmine interrupted, voice still steady. "The signature line matches 3 others archived from your address. Same format, same signature style, same metadata." A flicker of doubt flashed across Patel's face. Not outrage, not defiance. Just the momentary realization that denial was no longer an option. His jaw tightened as if bracing for impact. "I don't recall signing that," he said quickly. "Which is why," Jasmine replied, almost gently, "we rely on documentation, not memory." The room shifted again, not dramatically, not loudly, but in the subtle way energy changes when truth steps fully into the light. No yelling, no banging fists, just the weight of facts, one page at a time. Behind the table, Patel's lawyer placed a hand on his client's forearm. A squeeze, a silent signal that things were sliding toward the edge. Brenda handed Jasmine a final sheet. This one wasn't printed in black and white. It was in color. A screenshot, time-stamped, verified. Jasmine held it up only briefly before laying it flat in front of her. "This is a continuation of the same encrypted conversation with Mr. Devlin," she said. The quote reads, "She won't follow up. Just deny if needed." Patel exhaled hard, not a sigh, a collapse of breath. The first outward sign that the cracks beneath his calm exterior were no longer theoretical. Jasmine leaned forward just slightly and said, not with triumph, but with clarity, "But I did follow up. And now, we're here." The moment Patel stood, the room didn't gasp, it didn't shout, it just paused, as if time itself needed a second to confirm what it had just seen. He didn't make a speech. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached up, unclipped the microphone from his lapel with a fumbling urgency, muttered something to himself too low to catch, and began walking. Not briskly, not theatrically, but with a cold, deliberate motion that said more than any outburst ever could. The chairman's voice followed him like a warning echo. "Mr. Patel, you are not dismissed. You are under obligation to remain seated until formally released by this committee." But Patel didn't look back. His coat was slung over one arm, his tie slightly loosened. The red had drained from his face, leaving only something pale and tense beneath the courtroom lighting. Cameras tracked him automatically, instinctively. The wide shot capturing him as he slipped behind the chairwoman's desk and exited through a narrow side door, typically reserved for witnesses needing a moment to recover or lawyers scrambling to reframe a narrative. This was neither. Outside the chamber, staffers in the hallway froze mid-step. A junior reporter from a Midwest local station blinked twice at the feed on her tablet, then whispered, "Did he just walk out?" Her producer didn't answer. She was already texting her editor. One floor above, in the C-SPAN media suite, a college intern clipped the footage into a 30-second reel, titled it, "Patel Walks Mid-Testimony," and sent it to a Slack channel labeled Trending Bets. By the time Patel reached the private consultation room at the end of the hall, The footage had already been downloaded by 3 major political accounts on Twitter. In New York, an MSNBC anchor paused a scheduled segment, live on air. "Hold on," she said, squinting at a screen off camera. "This just happened. Patel just left the hearing room. We're getting confirmation now." Back in room 2141, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't look up. She simply closed the folder in front of her and adjusted her pen. Across the table, Brenda leaned in and whispered, "That got him rattled." Jasmine gave a near imperceptible nod. "He's hiding something bigger." The silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was alert, the kind that makes people put down their phones and listen, not because they were asked to, but because something was shifting in front of them. Reporters whispered. Aides staff exchanged glances. Chairman Dupont spoke again, slower now, the weight of what had just happened catching up to the authority of his tone. "We will now enter a brief recess while counsel determines how to proceed." Outside the room, 3 journalists clustered around a hallway monitor. "Is that real?" one asked, pointing to the timestamp. "It checks out," another said, already typing. "That memo wasn't part of discovery. Someone must have leaked it." Inside, Patel's chair remained empty. His nameplate still gleamed beneath the lights, untouched. And for just a moment, the entire chamber sat still, as if the air had turned thick with questions no one yet dared to answer. And upstairs, in a Starbucks on 4th and Madison in Seattle, 2 college students paused their scrolling at the same moment. "Yo," one said, holding out their phone. "Look at this. Who walks out of a congressional hearing mid-question?" The other leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Did she just pull out more documents?" "She's got something," the first replied. "Look at her face." And they weren't the only ones watching. The folder sat at the corner of her desk like it didn't belong there, thinner than the rest. No official stamp, no label, just 4 pages, clipped together and tucked inside a plain gray cover that seemed too quiet for what it carried. Jasmine hadn't touched it since before the hearing began. Brenda had slipped it across the table the moment Patel left, not with urgency, but with the solemn care of someone passing over the final piece of a locked puzzle. For a full minute, Jasmine didn't move. The room still buzzed faintly. Whispers among staffers, committee aides typing notes, the hum of cameras still blinking red. But her eyes stayed fixed on the folder, and the folder alone. She didn't open it. Not yet. Not because she doubted its contents, but because she knew what would happen if she did. Some truths don't just change hearings. They change headlines, narratives, legacies, and once they're spoken, they can't be recalled. Brenda leaned close again, her voice just above a whisper. "We don't have to use it, not unless he comes back." Jasmine finally looked up. Her expression hadn't changed, but her jaw was tighter now, her fingers still. "He will," she said. "His lawyer's too smart to let him hang himself on national television." But even as she spoke the words, her hand hovered over the folder. 2 fingers resting on the edge, not lifting, just holding. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. The kind of pause that only someone who understands systems takes. Not because they doubt their cause, but because they respect the magnitude of what comes next. Across the room, Chairman Dupont conferred quietly with 2 committee members. Staffers handed notes back and forth, and a low rustling overtook the space, the kind that usually comes at the end of something. But this wasn't the end, not yet. Jasmine tapped the folder once with her index finger. Not nervously, rhythmically. A decision was forming, wordless but steady. This wasn't just about Patel anymore. The documents in that folder touched more than his career. They pointed to a pattern, a blueprint, a deliberate structure built to keep certain things hidden and certain people protected. She thought back to the night she first read the email. Not the one Patel had denied, but the one after. The one that said, "If she asks, deny it." She won't follow up. Jasmine remembered staring at that sentence and whispering out loud to herself, "You're wrong." Now that follow-up was sitting right in front of her, and millions of people were watching, not because they wanted a scandal, but because somewhere inside, they needed someone to say the quiet part out loud. Brenda touched her shoulder lightly. "Whatever you decide," she said, "you've already done more than anyone thought possible." Jasmine didn't respond. She just exhaled, slow and steady, then finally opened the folder. Inside were 4 pages, one internal memo from Patel's personal email server, one text exchange with a senior legal advisor, one draft outline of a communications blackout plan, and one page with a single line, printed in bold, deconfliction strategy, avoid FOIA exposure. Jasmine stared at it, then just loud enough for only Brenda to hear, she said, "This wasn't just carelessness, it was designed." She didn't stand. She didn't speak to the room. She simply turned the first page over. And the hearing, though they didn't know it yet, had just entered its next chapter. Jasmine didn't raise her voice when she spoke next. She didn't need to. The silence in the room had already done the amplification for her. Even the chairman, who usually announced the resumption of hearings with a gavel and formal tone, simply nodded in her direction. No need for ceremony. Everyone knew something had shifted. She adjusted her mic slightly. "Let the record reflect," she began, "that the following document has been verified by 2 independent cybersecurity analysts and legal staff. It originates from Mr. Patel's personal email server, dated March 16th, 2 days after his sworn testimony before this very committee." Her voice didn't crack. It didn't swell. It just carried, clean, deliberate, cutting. The subject line reads, "Deconfliction Plan, avoid FOIA exposure." She let that hang, not for effect, but for weight. The acronym itself, FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, wasn't foreign to the room, but rarely did it appear so brazenly in a document whose entire purpose was to dismantle the very law it referenced. Brenda stepped to the side and tapped a key on the small laptop in front of her. On the monitor behind Jasmine, the first page of the document appeared. It wasn't long, just a bullet point list, but every line was more damning than the last. Use encrypted messaging for all sensitive comms. Avoid official email channels where possible. Do not refer to project names in written form. Establish alternate scheduling protocol for sensitive meetings. Ensure plausible deniability in written exchanges. No one interrupted. No one dared. Jasmine didn't read them out loud. She didn't have to. The screen said more than any raised voice ever could. Patel's seat remained empty, his nameplate sitting like an accusation in brass. She turned a page in her folder. "This plan," she said, "was not casual. It was deliberate. It outlines, line by line, a methodical effort to conceal communications from federal transparency requirements. This isn't about misuse of tools. This is about the design of evasion." A low involuntary "Jesus" slipped from one of the aides seated in the back. No one corrected him. Even Chairman DuPont's brows had knit together, not in partisanship, but in stunned realization. This wasn't a cover-up. It was a manual. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her tone still calm. "To be clear, this is not about encrypted apps in isolation. It's about the intention behind their use. It's not the technology that's damning. It's the pattern, the planning, the deliberate steps to make sure no one, not this committee, not the press, not the public, would ever see the full picture." For a moment, it was easy to forget she was a first-term representative, because the way she spoke, the way she moved through the facts, it was surgical, unapologetic, controlled, like someone who had stared into the dark long enough to know how to pull something into the light without blinking. She gestured to the monitor again. "Let the record also show that this document was not voluntarily submitted. It was obtained via anonymous drop. It was never archived in any official database. It exists only because someone decided it shouldn't disappear." Then she looked up, not at the committee, but at the gallery, at the cameras, at the nation. Her voice didn't rise, but her words sharpened. "And now, it does exist, on the record, in the light, and with that, the quiet conspiracy of silence Patel once trusted began to crumble. He didn't come through the main entrance this time. No cameras caught him adjusting his tie, no small talk with his lawyer, no performance. When Kash Patel re-entered room 2141, it was through the narrow side door, the one normally reserved for staff or witnesses not wanting to be seen. He stepped in quietly, his coat still draped over one arm, but his face had changed. The sharpness in his jaw was gone. replaced by a kind of hollow discipline. The look of a man who had been told behind closed doors that the story had already left his hands. The room noticed, but no one said a word. The silence acknowledged it for them. Jasmine didn't turn to look. She didn't shift in her seat. She simply closed the folder containing the deconfliction plan and set it to the side with quiet finality. Her posture hadn't moved since he left. Still forward, still present, still waiting. The kind of presence that no longer needed to chase the truth because it had already arrived. Chairman Dupont cleared his throat and leaned into his mic. Let the record reflect that Mr. Patel has returned to the chamber. We will resume with clarifications regarding materials submitted in his absence. He paused briefly. Mr. Patel, you may respond. Patel took a slow breath before speaking, his voice lower than before. Not out of submission, but weariness. I'd like to clarify a few things, he said. Some of the language in those documents, it wasn't meant to be taken literally. Jasmine finally looked at him. So you're saying, she asked plainly, it was metaphor? He hesitated, eyes scanning for anything. A nod from his lawyer, a subtle cue, a place to hide. None came. I'm saying that people in my position sometimes speak informally when outlining risk management strategies. Burner phones, she asked, her tone unwavering. Encrypted scheduling systems? Alternate calendars to avoid traceability? That's informal? Patel opened his mouth, but no answer came. Instead, he turned to his lawyer again. Do I have to keep answering questions framed like that? This time it wasn't his lawyer who responded. It was Chairman Dupont. Yes, Mr. Patel. You're under oath. You do. The pause that followed was longer than most, not for drama, but because Patel seemed to understand, finally, that the ground beneath him wasn't slippery anymore. It was collapsing. He leaned in, not aggressively, but with resignation. I was following a playbook, he said. The room stilled, not from shock, from recognition. One we all understood, one that worked. Jasmine's fingers tensed slightly around her pen. Her voice didn't rise. And who is we, Mr. Patel? He didn't respond right away. Brenda glanced over, holding her breath. Patel's lawyer sat perfectly still. The question wasn't loaded. It was surgical. Finally, Patel answered. The policy team, he said. At least 5 of us. And were you instructed to keep communications off the record? He nodded. Yes. By whom? His eyes dropped to the table. I'd rather not say here. Jasmine didn't push. Not yet. The moment didn't call for more. It called for letting the room sit with what had just been admitted. She leaned back slightly, pen still in hand, and said quietly, Then we'll keep asking until someone does. Patel didn't argue. He didn't shift. He just sat, no longer testifying to a committee, but answering to a moment he couldn't control. The phrase hung in the air like a fog. We all understood the playbook. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even said with defiance. If anything, Patel had spoken it with the tone of someone admitting gravity. Not guilt, but it didn't need emphasis. Because what he just said didn't implicate one man anymore. It revealed the existence of something worse, an understanding. Jasmine leaned forward slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to let everyone hear what hadn't yet been said. The pause wasn't tactical, it was respectful. To the moment, to the truth. To the people who had waited too long for someone to stop pretending these games weren't rehearsed behind closed doors. You said 5 people, she said, her voice measured. 5 members of a federal policy team knowingly used off-record channels to discuss sensitive matters related to intelligence briefings and national oversight procedures. Is that correct? Patel shifted. That's how many I knew of directly. And the instructions to use encrypted channels, were they verbal or documented? He paused again. Not for long, but enough to suggest that this line of questioning was walking him up to a door he wasn't supposed to open. Both, he admitted, at different points. Sometimes it was in Slack, sometimes in a briefing, sometimes just understood. Jasmine held up the deconfliction plan memo again. And this was one of those understandings? Patel nodded, slow and reluctant. It outlined what we'd already been doing. A quiet murmur passed through the gallery, not from outrage, but from recognition. Somewhere in the back, a former Department of Justice staffer turned reporter scribbled furiously into her notebook. Her editor would be calling in 10 minutes. She already knew the headline. Jasmine placed the memo down again, her hands folded atop it. "Mr. Patel," she said calmly, "you've now admitted that the memo you denied authoring reflected an operational standard you and others followed intentionally. You've confirmed that more than one official was aware, that it wasn't spontaneous, it was structured." Patel didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence that followed said it all. Brenda handed Jasmine another page. This one was simpler. A short timeline. A list of dates, emails, and login data. Jasmine didn't hold it up. She simply glanced at it once before continuing. "Over the past 2 months, my team has cross-referenced internal server logs, calendar conflicts, and anonymized metadata. What we've found suggests that what you're calling a playbook was not only known but consistently practiced over a period of 18 months. And that pattern," she added, letting each word fall like a stone, "was designed to keep this committee and the public in the dark." She didn't have to say conspiracy. The word wasn't necessary. It was already sitting in the room, uninvited but undeniable. Patel's jaw clenched, but he didn't push back. The fight had drained from his posture. His lawyer remained frozen, hands folded tight in his lap. No objections, no clarification. Jasmine exhaled slowly and said, "You didn't just misunderstand the law. You mapped your way around it." Then she leaned back, her voice quieter now. "And the only reason we're talking about it today is because someone left a door unlocked long enough for the truth to slip through." No one replied, and in that stillness, a hearing that once promised nothing had suddenly opened the first crack in a structure far more dangerous than a single lie. There are moments in public life when everything else fades. The lights, the titles, the spin. Moments when no voice is louder than a recording and no argument stronger than a person's own words. Jasmine Crockett knew she had just reached one of those moments. She didn't smile. She didn't lean forward. She simply tapped her pen once against the table, then spoke without ceremony. "Mr. Chairman," she said, "we'd like to enter into the record a portion of an internal training session held over Zoom last year. Mr. Patel was the host of this meeting in his capacity as senior advisor, and the portion we are about to play features him addressing communication protocol for internal staff." There was a pause. Not of resistance, but of anticipation. Patel didn't flinch, but he blinked. Once. Slowly. The quiet in the room was no longer tense. It was tight, focused. No phones buzzed. No papers rustled. Even the gallery held still. Brenda, standing just behind Jasmine, tapped a key on the laptop beside her. The screen behind them dimmed slightly. Then the voice filled the room. "Keep comms clean. If you've got anything that could even look like it crosses the line, send it through Signal. Never email. And if anyone asks later, deny knowledge, unless you're backed into a corner." It lasted 9 seconds. The room didn't react. Not yet. Then the clip continued. "We're not writing this stuff down. That's how people get pulled into hearings. You want cover, use private channels. You want risk, go formal. Your choice." And just like that, silence. Not the silence of pause. Not the kind that happens when people are confused or waiting for clarification. It was the silence that happens when a thing becomes undeniable. When the mask falls, and all that's left is the face underneath it. Jasmine didn't say anything. She let the clip hang there in the air, untouched, like a glass on the edge of a table. Patel sat motionless. His lawyer still beside him, finally moved, but only to rub his forehead with the tips of his fingers, like someone trying to will a headache into silence. Chairman Dupont leaned forward slowly. "Mr. Patel," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "That voice, is it yours?" Patel stared straight ahead. "Yes," he said after a pause. Not loud, not apologetic, just the bare truth, stripped of all its earlier polish. "Do you wish to retract any of those statements?" Dupont asked next. Patel shook his head. Barely. "No." Jasmine leaned forward for the first time in nearly 10 minutes. Her voice was quiet. Not for effect, but because anything louder would have diminished the gravity of the moment. "Then let the record show that the person who testified He had no knowledge of deliberate evasion protocols, was, in fact, the one who gave the instructions on how to avoid accountability. Still, Patel didn't reply, because there was nothing left to say. The clip wasn't long. It wasn't graphic. It didn't show violence or chaos or shouting. Just 45 seconds of policy turned into practice, of calm voices laying out quiet corruption. But it would go viral within the hour, because people don't forget the sound of someone telling others how to hide. And this time, the country had heard it for themselves. There was no applause, no audible gasp, no outcry from the crowd. Just silence, the kind that rearranges the air in a room, the kind that sits on people's shoulders without permission. Patel had just admitted it was his voice. Jasmine had just shown the country what denial sounded like. Before it ran out of room, Brenda didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She stood still behind Jasmine, watching Patel's lawyer lean toward his client, whispering something sharp and fast. But Patel barely responded. His hands were clasped now, not in defiance, not in prayer, but like someone holding on to the last of something they didn't know how to name. Jasmine sat back slightly, not out of relief, but readiness. Her posture had changed, not because she had won, but because she no longer had to convince the room of what it already understood. The facts had spoken, the voice had spoken, and now her silence said everything else. Chairman DuPont reached for his gavel but didn't strike it. Not yet. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and glanced across the dais. This committee will now enter an extended review phase. Testimony provided here today will be forwarded to the Oversight Committee and referred to the Department of Justice for legal coordination. He paused, then added, "Let the record reflect that all additional exhibits have been entered and verified." Still, Jasmine didn't move. Outside the chamber, the ripple had already become a wave. News anchors interrupted live broadcasts to play the clip. Podcasts were recording emergency episodes. People in grocery stores and firehouses, in high school gyms, were hitting play. Not on a scandal, but on a soundbite that didn't need commentary. And inside room 2141, that moment, the moment after the truth, felt like the eye of a storm that had been building for years. Patel didn't ask to respond. His confidence had drained from his shoulders, his voice, his fingers. And still, Jasmine said nothing more. Because when the truth has already been said in a person's own voice, anything else feels small. Brenda finally leaned in, whispering, "We weren't even looking for that clip." Jasmine nodded slightly, her gaze still locked forward. Brenda added, "It came in anonymously." That was the piece no one outside the room knew. The audio file, 45 seconds that detonated years of plausible deniability, hadn't been discovered. It had been delivered. Clean, unaltered, unrequested. Jasmine's voice returned. Low, steady, only for Brenda. Someone wanted it found. Brenda didn't ask who. She didn't have to. In a city full of secrets, it only takes one crack in the concrete to let the light in. Across the room, Patel still hadn't moved. His lawyer finally leaned back, defeated, quiet. There would be follow-ups, legal action, media statements. None of it mattered now, because this wasn't just the exposure of one man. It was the unveiling of a pattern, one so well hidden behind decorum and doctrine that it took only 45 seconds of casual instruction to pull the mask off completely. And Jasmine, she hadn't done it with anger, or spectacle, or political bravado. She had done it with stillness, with facts, with timing. And the one sentence still echoing in every corner of the room was no longer the audio clip itself. It was the unspoken question behind it. If this is what we heard, what haven't we? 2 weeks earlier, in a windowless basement 4 blocks from Capitol Hill, Melinda Cash sat alone beneath flickering fluorescent lights, sorting through boxes no one else wanted to touch. She wasn't senior staff. She didn't wear a badge that let her skip security. Her job was simple: archival reorganization for the Intelligence Subcommittee. She logged hours in front of dusty binders, flagged duplicate entries, and cleaned up corrupted records from decades-old hearings. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't political, and no one was watching her, which is why she noticed what others missed. It started as a joke. 2 staffers laughing just outside the records room. The ghost drive, one of them said. You know, the W file, staff line. No one admits it exists, but everyone's used it. Melinda didn't laugh. She noted the phrase, W staff line, and later, when the floor was quiet, typed it into the metadata search tool she used to track misfiled testimony. What she found wasn't much. 4 scattered references over 3 years, each tied to emails with unusual encryption, none routed through the formal congressional system, but all of them pointed to one sender, Kash Patel. She didn't rush to anyone, not her supervisor, not even her roommate. Melinda had learned the rules of quiet power in Washington. Make sure before you speak. So she kept digging. She used her off hours, traced where the packet data had jumped servers, matched it to login timestamps from Patel's private device, information hidden in low-level system logs most people skipped right over. And when she was sure, really sure, she printed everything out. 4 documents, 1 screenshot, a USB stick holding an uncut audio file dated 11 months earlier. No edits, no labels, just one file name, internal training final.mp4. She didn't take it to the press. She didn't call a watchdog group. She walked on her day off to the local district office of Representative Jasmine Crockett in Dallas. She didn't ask to speak with the congresswoman. She didn't leave her name. She placed the envelope on the desk of a young aide, looked him in the eyes and said, "Give this to her." No one else. Then she left. Back in D.C., Jasmine didn't know who had sent the documents. The return address was fake, the envelope unmarked. But her staff ran forensics. The files were original, clean. The voice was Patel's. The metadata aligned perfectly. There was no forgery, just truth, raw and undeniable. In a city that ran on secrets, someone had broken the chain, and no one even knew her name. As Patel's empire began to collapse in full view of a nation, Melinda Kash returned to work. She filed more boxes, ate lunch alone, walked past the same staffers who never learned what she'd done. She wasn't there to be thanked. She wasn't there to be seen. She just wanted people to do their jobs right. And when she placed that envelope on that desk, she wasn't exposing a man. She was cracking the gears of a machine that had always relied on one thing, that no one would ever look closely enough to see how it worked. Melinda Kash never intended to be the reason anyone made headlines. She wasn't a whistleblower in the traditional sense. She never rehearsed a statement, never contacted a journalist, never had a lawyer. She didn't even tell her mother. In fact, if anyone asked her what she did for a living, she'd usually just say, "I organize what other people leave behind." And it wasn't wrong. Every day she descended 2 flights of stairs into a sub-level most Hill staffers didn't even know existed. The archive room had no windows, and the fluorescent bulbs flickered like they were apologizing for still being alive. There were no plaques on the walls, no chatter about policy, no speeches, just silence, paper, dust, and Melinda. It was that silence that made her good at what she did. She had learned over time that if you listen long enough, documents begin to speak, not loudly but clearly. They repeat, they contradict, they echo things that were never meant to echo. Most people skimmed. Melinda read, thoroughly, obsessively, not because she was paid to, but because she knew that somewhere, someone was counting on no one doing just that. She first heard the name W staff line in a conversation she was never meant to hear. 2 staffers, young and careless, joked about a ghost account used for communications that wouldn't show up in official logs. One of them laughed. "Even if they away the whole thing, this one's untouchable." The other replied, "Unless someone's dumb enough to dig that deep." Melinda wasn't dumb. She just didn't know how to let things go. That night she searched the term, found fragments, a line in an email, a reference in an access log, a calendar entry that didn't match any scheduled hearing. She didn't know exactly what she was looking at, but she recognized patterns. And patterns always led somewhere. She followed the digital thread until it pointed her to a name she recognized, Patel. She'd seen it before, in documents marked classified adjacent, in logs that looked scrubbed, in transfers that were just a little too late to match official timelines. And then she found it. The file, a clip, 45 seconds long, No metadata, no distribution tag, but the voice was clear. She didn't watch it right away. She stared at the file name, Internal Training Final. She clicked it, listened. Once, twice. She didn't react, didn't cry, didn't panic. She just sat there in a chair with a broken wheel, under the hum of a light that buzzed louder than it glowed. Then she pulled a blank envelope from the supply drawer. She didn't do it out of rage or revenge. She did it because she believed someone had to. Not in public, not with press cameras, but quietly, like all the real things are done. She didn't want to be noticed. She didn't want credit. She only wanted the truth to be handed to someone who still knew what to do with it. Jasmine Crockett was that someone, and when Melinda placed the envelope on the desk of a staffer who hadn't even looked up, she said just 6 words. For her, no one else, please. Then she walked out the door, took the metro home, and folded laundry while the country unknowingly braced for a voice they hadn't heard. From a woman no one was watching. Back in her office, Jasmine sat in silence, the hum of the overhead light the only sound competing with her thoughts. Brenda had left the room to give her space, though neither of them had said so aloud. On the desk in front of her were 3 pages, the deconfliction plan, the screenshot of the encrypted messages, and the training transcript with Patel's voice. She stared at them, not like someone reviewing evidence, but like someone mapping fault lines. Because that's what this was now. Not a mistake, not an oversight, but a fracture in the foundation. What bothered her most wasn't Patel's arrogance, or even the way the committee had nearly brushed this all aside. It was how easily this kind of behavior had become procedural. Routine, a memo to avoid accountability, filed like it was just another Wednesday. Instructions to conceal truth, passed along like calendar invites. There was no smoking gun. There didn't need to be. The system hadn't failed. It had performed exactly as designed. She thought back to her first months in Congress, how often people in power had used words like process and tradition as shields. How many times she'd sat in committee rooms listening to testimony full of empty phrases. As far as I'm aware, to the best of my recollection, within acceptable guidelines. And now she understood why. The rules weren't broken. They were bent just far enough to protect the bending. The Patel memo wasn't shocking because it was unique. It was shocking because it wasn't. Brenda returned with a folder tucked under one arm and a post-it stuck to her palm. They've called for a review hearing next week, she said softly. The DOJ wants access to everything. Jasmine nodded, but her eyes stayed on the documents. Do you ever wonder, she asked, how many other memos just like this one never made it out of the inbox? Brenda didn't answer immediately. Then she said, I wonder that every day. Jasmine leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. We build laws around disclosure, she said, but no one teaches you how to spot silence. That's what they count on, Brenda said. People assuming if it wasn't mentioned, it wasn't real. Jasmine reached for a highlighter and marked one line from the transcript. Patel's voice, calm and practiced. Use signal. Never email. Deny knowledge unless backed into a corner. She didn't highlight it for theatrics. She did it because she wanted to remember that tone. The ease with which deception had become just another tool of governance. This wasn't just one man protecting himself, Jasmine murmured. It's a culture, a choreography. And if we don't name it for what it is, it'll slip back into the shadows the minute the cameras turn off. She looked up at Brenda. So we don't let them turn off. Brenda nodded. Then we keep pulling threads. No, Jasmine said, more resolute now. We stop pulling. We start tearing. There was a long pause between them, not from uncertainty, from understanding. And as Jasmine turned her chair slightly to face the whiteboard behind her, already marked with names, dates, unanswered questions, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt awake. Later that night, long after the hearing room had emptied and the headlines had taken flight, Jasmine sat alone beneath the low light of her office facing a whiteboard smeared with names, arrows, and half-erased fragments of timelines. The city outside had gone quiet, but her thoughts hadn't. There was no more adrenaline, no more applause, just the hum of what now felt permanent. She wasn't thinking about Patel anymore. She was thinking about the system that had allowed him to be so confident. The documents, the memos, the ghost accounts. They weren't accidents. They were bricks. And together they built something larger than any one man. A structure designed not to deceive openly, but to obscure slowly. It wasn't corruption in the explosive, cinematic sense. It was procedural. It was patient. It came dressed in compliance. What haunted her most wasn't the content of the memo. It was the assumption underneath it, that no one would ever care enough to look. And for years, no one had. She remembered sitting through her first oversight briefing and asking why certain files were missing from the public record. The answer had been polite and practiced. Those requests fall outside our statutory requirement. And just like that, a wall appeared. Clean, invisible, unassailable. What Jasmine saw now was that the wall wasn't a glitch. It was the design. The system was built not just to handle information, but to bury it. Avoidance wasn't a symptom, it was architecture. And like all architecture, it was meant to endure. The worst part was how normal it had all become. Encrypted apps, off-site meetings, verbal-only briefings. Everyone knew the tricks, and everyone called them protocol. The shame wasn't in the hiding, it was in how easily everyone agreed not to see. Jasmine stood up and stared at the board. She traced one line from Patel's name to an unlabeled box, then another, from the anonymous drop to a date no one had flagged before. She didn't know where it all led yet, but she knew it wasn't done. The structure was still standing. What she'd done so far was crack the paint. The real question now wasn't whether she could break it open. It was whether the country would care when she did. Would people look past the headlines and into the footnotes? Would they realize that what had been exposed wasn't an isolated betrayal, but a manual used in meetings they'd never see? And if they did, what would they do with that knowledge? Jasmine didn't have the answer, but she had a marker in her hand and a name to add to the board. By Friday afternoon, the building was quieter than it had been all week. Reporters had moved on to the next developing headline. Analysts shifted their focus to legal implications, and the internet, as always, began chasing its next moment of outrage. But inside her office, Jasmine Crockett sat with the same quiet stillness she had carried throughout the hearing. No cameras, no committee, just the hum of a forgotten printer and the scratch of Brenda jotting follow-ups in the corner. There were calls she hadn't returned, invitations she hadn't answered, morning show producers still emailing for interviews she never planned to give. Not because she wasn't proud of what happened, but because the moment wasn't hers to wear. When the press finally caught her leaving the building, there were no statements prepared, no press secretary walking ahead. A reporter stepped forward, asked the obvious question, "Congresswoman Crockett, do you have any final words after this week's explosive revelations?" Jasmine paused for just a second, then looked directly at him and said quietly, evenly, "I'm glad the truth got the microphone." And then she kept walking. That single sentence, not pre-written, not rehearsed, was the one that stuck. By nightfall, it was quoted on cable news, printed on t-shirts, and screenshotted in Instagram stories with no caption needed. But Jasmine didn't notice. She was already home, answering texts from her father, checking in on her staff, and heating leftover soup. She wasn't chasing the storm. She had walked through it and walked out still holding her purpose intact. The truth had gotten the microphone. It had spoken in Patel's own voice. It had echoed in the silence that followed. And now, whether anyone liked it or not, it had landed in inboxes, classrooms, headlines, and late-night debates around kitchen tables across the country. Jasmine knew most people would forget the details, the timestamps, the memo, the precise phrasing of denial. But she also knew they'd remember something deeper, that someone didn't flinch when the silence needed to be broken, that someone listened when no one else did, and that someone somewhere, who never asked to be named, had handed the microphone to the right hands. Jasmine never raised her voice. She didn't have to, because when truth speaks clearly, it doesn't need to shout. Long after the news trucks had packed up and left Capitol Hill, after Patel's name slipped from front-page urgency into the blur of yesterday's outrage, something remained. Not anger, not celebration, but a stillness, a scratch under the surface of things, the kind that doesn't scream, but lingers. Jasmine Crockett walked alone through one of the quieter hallways after the final hearing closed. No cameras followed, no headlines waited, just her heels echoing gently against marble that had heard too many empty promises to be moved easily. As she turned a corner, a janitor, older, his shirt sleeves frayed, eyes tired but alert, paused mid-motion with his mop. He didn't ask for a photo. He didn't mention the news. He just looked at her and said quietly, "Thank you for not yelling and still being heard." She didn't respond at first, just nodded, a small gesture but heavy, the kind that means I heard you too. Then she kept walking, but that sentence stayed, not because it was loud, but because it was true. It's easy to start fires that burn bright, with rage, with noise, with performance. They catch quickly, and they die just as fast. But there's another kind of fire, the kind that takes its time, that glows beneath the surface, that burrows under the noise and stays warm in silence. Jasmine hadn't come to be the spark. She came to hold the match steady while the system tried to blow it out. And in doing so, she didn't ignite something new. She reminded people that the flame had never really gone out. It was just waiting for someone to stop pretending not to see it. She didn't walk away from this as a hero. She walked away as a keeper of the quiet kind of fire, the kind that doesn't fade. Sometimes the most powerful voice in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one that refuses to look away. Jasmine didn't break the system with noise. She cracked it open with patience, with evidence, and with the courage to stand still when others ran. In a world full of shouting, her silence demanded attention, because it was built on truth. So here's the question for you. When the moment comes, in your workplace, your community, your family, will you be the one who dares to listen, to speak, or simply not look away?